Black Gemara. It's Motzei Shabbos Parshas Kiseitze. We are in Daf Memhei Amud Aleph, the Gemara Sukah. The Mishnah talks about mitzvahs arava. So there's a separate mitzvah besides the Arba Minim. There was another mitzvah called the mitzvah of arava that they used to perform in the Beis Hamikdash. Ketzad. So how exactly was it performed? Mokum Hoya Lemata Yerushalayim. It was an area not far from Yerushalayim, below Yerushalayim, the Nikra, and had the name. It was called Moitza. It was called Moitza. We'll see later in the Gemara why it's called Moitza. It was like a tax-free haven. Yordin Lisham. They would go there, Umelaktin Misham, and there they would collect Mudavir Shal Arava. They would come and collect over there the branches of Aravas. Uboyin, they would come. They would stand them up on the sides of the mizbech. The Roshei and Kfufin al Gabi hamizbech, and these Aravas would then bent over, and hanging over the mizbech. So the Gemara later in the Brisa will tell us how tall were they and how that worked. Now, then Tiku v'Hariyu v'Tiku. When they did this particular mitzvah, they were below the shofar, and Tosha says it's to make more simcha, add more joy, or other Rishonim say, so to declare that this is a big mitzvah. Everyone should be aware. The Chol Yom, every day, makifin es hamizbeach pamachas, they would circle the mizbeach once, and v'omer they would say, Ona Hashem Hoshiana, Ona Hashem Hatzlichana, and Rabbi Yehuda says, Omer, you say, Ani. Now, there's two opinions how you read it. Vahoy or vahu haishiana. Now, Rashi explains, very interesting, the long Rashi here. What's this ani vahu haishiana? So Rashi says that he decided to be a bit enigmatic. Instead of just saying Hashem, they said ani vahu, which is the same gematria as ani Hashem. So, like on Hashem. But instead of saying it openly, they said it enigmatic. Both equal 78, and that's why that's what he's saying. But then Rashi brings a very interesting thing. We learned already in Yuma, there's a special name of Hashem that they used to use inside the Beis Hamikdash. It was a 72-letter name of Hashem. It's called Shem Ab. There's 72 letters. There's a 63 letter Shem Sag. There's a 45 letter Shem Ma. There's a 52 letter Shem Ban, and there's a 72 letter. And Rashi tells us here what the 72 letter is. There are 3 psukim in Parshas B'Shalach, consecutive psukim. Each pasuk is made up of 72 letters, if you count them up. Starts from Vahi B'Shalach, and then but it starts from in Parshas B'Shalach. It starts from Vayisa Malach Elakim. And so basically what you do is you take the first letter of the first pasuk, the last letter of the second pasuk, and the first letter of the third pasuk. They're all consecutive. Each of these psukim is made up of 7 letters. And so the first pasuk is Vayisa, which begins with the letter Vav. The last letter of the 7th pasuk, Halayla, is a Hey, so that's Vav Hey. And then the first letter of the last pasuk is Vayet Moshe, it's a Vav. So Vav Hey Vav. If you read it that way, then the word is actually written. If you read it Vahoy, and then Rashi explains, we then take the middle letter, the 37th letter of each pasuk. And you'll find that we have an aleph from the word machareim and a nun from the word ha'onon. And then you have again, what do you call it? A yud from the word kodim. So therefore it's ani. Tosfos says, and others say, that it comes from the fact that Hashem says, either some Rishonim say it says, Va'ata ani anihu, I am one who's going to take care of you. So we're davening to that ani. And or Hashem says, Imay anochi b'tzara. I find myself together with the Yidden in the Golus. When you're in trouble, I'm there with you. And it says, V'ani b'techa gola, I'm amongst the Golus. So we're davening. And then it says in Yirmiyahu, who also b'zikim, Hashem is tied down with us in Golus. So we're saying, Ani v'hu. If in Nusach Chabad, when it comes to Shana Rabbah, we actually say, Ani v'hu. In the Ashkenaz Surim that I saw, it says also Ani v'hu. I'm not sure if in all Ashkenaz Surim it says Ani v'hu or Ani v'hoy. But you'll see, if you see a Sid, it says Ani v'hoy because they're following Rashi. And so there's no Aleph at the end. And if it says Ani v'hu, because we're following Tosfos, that the meaning is that we're davening not just for ourselves, we're davening for Hashem also that he can leave this Golus. Okay, then we continue. But on that day, on Hoshana Rabbah, Makifin es hamizbeach sheva pamim. They circled the mizbeach 7 times. And remember, we had an argument whether they're circling with the lulav and they just place skipa, they just placed our ravas against the mizbeach, or whether they actually circled with the mizbeach, with our ravas themselves. And there was a whole discussion. Even if you hold a circling with our rava, according to the Rimagash, we have a problem. How can a Yisrael go between the mizbeach and the base of Mikdash? So he learns it actually means is they would either, some say they made a circle and each one stood, like maybe 100 people and each one stood in one place. It looked like a circle. Or they actually just placed it against the mizbeach, and that was they just stood there against the mizbeach and they placed it there, and that was the circle, and they did it 7 times. They'd go back, put it down, come back again, and so on. B'shas p'tiras ma'anayim, when they finished the mitzvah, what would they say? They would say, Yoifil l'cha mizbeach, Yoifil l'cha mizbeach. You did well, mizbeach. You did well, mizbeach. Rabbi Lezer says they're actually praising. They'll say l'ka to Hashem. U'lecha mizbeach, and to you mizbeach. We'll soon see in the Gemara how can you put Hashem together mizbeach. L'ka u'lecha mizbeach. K'maaseh b'chol, the same way they did in the weekday. Kach maaseh Shabbos, they would do it on Shabbos. Ella, but on Shabbos, melaktin oisim erev. Obviously, they couldn't pick it that morning because it's Shabbos, so they would pick it on Friday. U'manichin oisim begiga yeshel zav. They would place them in golden vessels, and Rashi says full of water. Others say there was no water, golden vessels themselves, so somehow or another keep them fresh. Kedei shelo yichmoshu, in order they shouldn't dry. And the fact that from overnight is already considered drying tells us that drying doesn't mean that it has to be like you touch a finger and it falls apart. It just loses its color to already consider drying. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika argues. He says they didn't use arava, hashaina. What they did was they used charoya shaldekel, branches of the palm tree, like a lulav. Hayimavin they would bring. The chayvtin oise bekarka b'tzir mizbech, they would place them on the side of the mizbech. So big machek is Rishonim. What exactly is Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika saying? Is he saying that in addition to the arava, they also brought like a lulav to stand there, or is he saying there was no such thing as a arava at all, only the lulav? So we'll see in the Gemara later how Tosfos wants to learn the Gemara. Okay, but Oisa Hayim, and that day Hoshana Rabbah was called Chibut Charoyas. They called it Chibut Charoyas. Rashi says Chibut is they used to wave it. So the Hoshana is they actually used to wave. The Rambam says Chibut means they used to bang it against the floor, which is what we do today by Hoshanas. The Rambam says 2 or 3 times. Many of us do because of the Arizal 5 times. Then it says here, Miyad Tenoikis Shemtin Es Ludein V'Oichnes again. Literally means, I'll tell you the word miyad, what it means in a second. But tonight, our little kids, you take away the lulav on the 7th day, and they would eat the esrogim. There's 2 ways of learning pshat here, an argument, Rashi and Tosfos and all the Rishonim. Miyad can either be translated straight away, immediately, or miyad can mean from the hand. So Rashi learns it means from the hand. So they would take the kids esrogim and lulavim away. Once they did their mitzvah, they completed their mitzvah. They would, on Hoshana Rabbah, they would take their lulavim away, and they would eat the esrogim of the kids. That's how Rashi learns. And Tosfos says from this, and Rashi says there's nothing wrong with it. They're not stealing. Why are they not stealing from a kid? They're doing it because of simcha. So Tosfos says from this Rashi we learn they used to have a very interesting custom by chasnas, not sure when it stopped, that in front of the chassan kala 2 men used to have a duel, right? And they would sit on horses and they would have these long spears and they would, jab each other. And if they ripped somebody's clothes off, they would be exempt because they did it out of simcha. Not sure exactly what the point of that whole exercise was and why it stopped. But in Shulchan Aruch in Hilchas Purim, it says in the Ramah and the Magen Avram that at Purim, you said l'chaim, he's supposed to be very happy, right? And Adela Yada. If you then, at a Purim, so the tear, rip somebody's clothes, break a dish, you don't have to pay, you're not responsible, because it's a simcha that made it happen. There's an argument, if you hurt somebody physically, whether you're also exempt or we don't take it that far. But Tosfos learns differently. Tosfos learns miyad means immediately. That means we're not talking about children. We're talking about adults. But as soon as the kids finish the mitzvah, the adults, what do you call it? Rashi learns adults would take the kids' stuff away. Taisus learns no. The kids themselves, as soon as they finished, they would take the lovin to play with it, just with each other, and the sreigim, they would go ahead and they would eat it. Okay, so the Gemara, Tony, we learned Mokum Kalanya, how the Gemara says, what exactly is this? Sorry?
Can I ask you a question? Just talking about the Aravas, how did we finish up? The last day or two, we had a whole discussion of whether Aravas, how are we doing it? Is it a minig? Is it a halacha? How do we finish up? What's
that is talking about not in the Beis Hamikdash, that's talking about us. In the Beis Hamikdash, we learned a few opinions. We learned one opinion was because it says Arvei Nochal. Right. There's two mitzvahs. Abba Shaul says there's two mitzvahs of our rabbis. One in the lulav, one in the mizbech. Yeah. The Chacham say it's halacha l'Moshe Messinai that we do that. That's the Beis Hamikdash. When the Gemara has a discussion of what about us? We do our rabbis on Hoshana Rabbah. What's that all about? And there's an argument whether it's Yisod Nevi'im or Minig Nevi'im, and the halacha is Minig Nevi'im. Then there are two opinions in the Achrayim what Minig Nevi'im means. Does it mean, like Rashi learns, the Nevi'im instructed us to do it, but as a custom, and we don't make a bracha because only a Minig? Or did the Nevi'im do it themselves for themselves, and everybody else noticed it? They liked the Minig, so we did it totally on our own. And the big difference is, generally, do we make a bracha on hugging? For example, do we make a bracha when you light Hanukkah candles in shul? Purely a Minig. Do you make a bracha on that? Do you make a bracha on when you say Halal Rosh Chodesh? It's a minik. If you learn that the Nevi'im told us to do it, and yet we don't make a bracha, that means that generally speaking, that I'm in Hagim, you don't make a bracha. So you don't make a bracha when you say Halal Rosh Chodesh, and nor do you make a bracha when you light candles in shul. But if you learn that minig Nevi'im means they just did it on their own, nobody told them to do it, they just did it on their own, then a minig where the Rabbanim told you to do it, then you should make a bracha. So you make a bracha on Halal, on half Halal, you make a bracha on Hanukkah, and then within that, there are many other opinions, which we won't go through now. But we left off that it's minig Levi, but that's us, big Gvulin, outside the base of English. Tani, we learned this place, Moitze Mokum Kalanya Habe, it was a place that's like a tax haven, and the Tana did our Tana, my time of Karli Moitze, it's quite a strange name is Moitze. I did the Mayfig Mekargi the Malka Karli Moitze because it's taken out of the normal jurisdiction of the kingdom and you don't pay taxes, so we call it Moitze, taken out, extracted. It's
got nothing to do with the place where Motzah is now.
Where's that?
It's just outside Yerushalayim.
Same place.
Maybe that is.
Maybe
that's it.
I think it's the same place.
That's probably the same place.
I'm pretty sure it is.
On the signboard when you're driving out of Yerushalayim, there's a thing to Motzah.
It's a little village, yeah.
Could very well be, maybe. Yeah. So buying the Zeik for nice they just go and replace it against the Mizbech. Tana, we learned rabbis. We learned that they used to be. They did many. There's no law how many rabbis. So they used to use many. The aruchas and long, the gvayas and tall. How tall were they? Achad asad amma, 11 amas long. Rashi actually says that when we do Hashanah on Hoshana Rabbah ourselves, even though there's no minimum. Yesterday, the Gemara, they asked about the shear. We talked about the leaves. We never talked about the size of the actual Arava. But Rashi says it's nice to have long ones to show we like the mitzvah. And also because the Aravas that we're trying to remember were very, very tall. I mean, imagine 11 amas tall each willow. Why 11? We'll see in a minute. And the reason is we wanted to overlap on top of the Mizbech Amma. And so why did it be 11? The Mizbech was 9 amas tall, but we need an extra 2 amas to be able to go over the Mizbech and Amma. Why is that? So Gemara explains. It had to be on the Yesod, they placed it. Okay, briefly, what happened like this. The Mizbech, they used a form. The Mizbech itself was 32 amas by 32 amas. They then rose 1 amma, and they made another form, and they indented it 1 amma. So now the next section of the Mizbech was only 30 amas by 30 amas, and it rose 5 amas. That ledge over there is called the Yesod. It went 5 amas up, and then they went further in another amma. So now the Mizbech itself is only 28 amma, and that ledge there is called Seiviv. The Kohanim would stand there and do the service on top of the Mizbech. Then you went up 3 amma. So far we had 1 amma, 5, and 3, which is a total of 9 amas. Then you had the 4 corners. You had the 4 corners. So Rashi holds that these corners were 1 amma tall. They were on the corners of Mizbech, and the Maracha was right in the center. So the top of the Mizbeach from the ground was 9 amas tall. But if you then take the lulav, these aravas, and you put it at an angle, because it's 2 amas sticking out. So basically, if it's on the ground and 9 amas tall, it's almost the entire 11 amas would just get you to the very top of the Mizbeach. So it must be that you place it on the Yesod, so you raise an amma above. You lost. So the Mizbeach itself from there was only 8 amas high. You lost an amma and a bit because of this angle, but you had at least an amma to overhang and bend it over to the Mizbech. Other Rishonim learn, that's the Ritva and other Rishonim, they learn actually that the Kronos, then they went in another amma and they built another amma high, which means that the Ma'aracha was actually 26 ammas wide, not 28. And the height of the Ma'aracha was the same height as the tip of the corners of the 4 corners of the Mizbech. And the lulav had to hang over that. Okay, so therefore it was 11 amas tall, as it says right here. All mechdi. So it must be ala Yesod Monachlu was standing on top of the ledge on the bottom, on the base on the bottom. Because the Yisrael Gadad Cha'adam Monachlu he placed on the ground. Mechdi, let's see. All amma v'kanas amma went up an amma, went in an amma. Zeu Yesod. That's called the base. All the chamish, then the Mizbech went up 5 and the kanas went in an amma. Zeu Seivit. That's the ledge around the middle. All the shoulders went up another 3. Zeu Mokum HaKronos. That's where you place the corners. Noichas agab Mizgech. So now, if it's sitting on the ground and the Mizbech is 9 amas from the ground and you're protruding 2 amas outwards, how in the world an 11 amma arava would hang over, Mizbech in a substantial way? You must say that was on the base. Shema Mino is a good proof. Amar Abavur, who says, my Korah, how do you know that it has to be hanging on the Mizbech or all overlapping the Mizbech? Says the Gemara, Shenemer, it says, Isru, they would tie it, Chag, Ba'avoisim, that they would surround, Isru is over here, the surrounding, they would surround on Yom Tov Ba'avoisim with these Aravas, at Kanas Mizbech, until the corners of Mizbech. I mean that they're taller than the Mizbech, when the Kanas rose an Amma above the Mizbech. So therefore, we know that Arava has to be taller than Mizbech. Talking about that pasuk, if you take a lulav and you tie the lulav in the hadas and Arava, which we hold you don't have to, but it's a hiddur mitzvah, like the Chachamim. And the hadas ba'avoisa, and you have kosher hadassim. Remember, according to Tafrin, you can have the top of the hadassim clipped. But so halachi doesn't need to be clipped. But if you have proper hadassim, nothing clipped, the right ones with the proper leaves and everything else, it's as if you just built a mizbeach v'hikriv olav carbon. If we do the mitzvah lulav right, we will get the extra credit as if we built a mizbeach and we brought a carbon on it from the very same pasuk. Shneimar says, Isru Chag ba'avoisim, because it says that if you tie together on Yom Tov ba'avoisim, and now we're going to translate avoisim is the hadassim because it's like braided together. Ad kanas mizbech, I'll treat you as if you sprinkled the blood on the corners of mizbech and you brought a carbon. Bring about this pasuk.
So they're touching the word avotim differently, the two.
Yes, and now we're going to give you a third touch. So the first time we touch avoisim means just trees, which you said means aravas. Then we touch avoisim means eitz anaf avos. The Torah used the word expression avos, which is hadassim. And now we're going to give you a third touch, and that is as follows. Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying, obviously he lived many, many years later, but you heard it, some people in between. But Rabbi Yochanan, usually Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says things in the name of Shimon Yochai, but not in this case. He said the name of Rabbi Shimon Hamachuzi, who said the name of Rabbi Yochanan Hamachuzi. Whoever that person was, he says as follows, that anybody that he ties to the Yom Tov Achila, the Shtia, you have a good meal, a festive meal, you eat plenty and you drink plenty. Maile all of our kasa, the Torah will consider it kilabana mizbech, you built a mizbech, the hikriv all of carbon, and you brought a carbon on it. Shneimar, it says, Isru Chag ba'avoisim. If you connect to the Yom Tov ba'avoisim, and we're translating avoisim now means thick, talking about animals, not chicken or poultry, only with animals. Ain't simcha ella b'basa. When we say ain't simcha ella b'basa, we're going to learn about chagigat of test. It can mean only animal meat, beef or veal, but not poultry. Ad kanas mizbech, as if you brought a mizbech. So there's two ways of understanding the Gemara here. One way of understanding the Gemara is literally we're talking about Yom Tov itself. That on Yom Tov you should have a proper, wholesome meal, and you should also be festive. But others say it means, Rashi actually brings also another pshat, it means Isruchak, the day that's tied to the Yom Tov, and that is the day after Yom Tov. And Mitzvah Yom Tov also there's a little bit of a Yom Tov, and that's why we never say Tachtel after Yom Tov. You're not supposed to fast after Yom Tov that first day because of Isruchak. Not everyone agrees to that, and some say only certain Yom Tovim, not all Yom Tovim. But Rashi brings both opinions here. Talking about Amar Chizkiah, Amar Rabbi Yimim Shemir Yochai. We mentioned Rabbi Yimim Shemir Yochai. He mentioned a few other things. Kol ha-mitzvahs, all the mitzvahs. Ain't not b'yotze b'hen al dergelasi. Not get all mitzvahs. Forget about lulav. Every mitzvah. If you're doing a mitzvah, it has to be done in an upstanding way. Remember, it says Atse shitim oimdim. It says regarding the Mishkan that the pillars should be, the planks should be standing upward. And we learn all mitzvahs. They try to work out exactly which mitzvahs are we talking about, because how many mitzvahs are there that we have to be holding up. You have to be standing upright. So, but lulav, you have to be upright. And esrog, everybody asks, we're carrying it the wrong way, because esrog grows sort of downwards. But we say that really it should be growing upwards. It's the weight of the esrog that causes it to come downwards. So therefore, the pitum is the top part, and the oiketz, the stem, is the bottom part, even though it actually grows the other way around. There's a very interesting question that was asked to the Bekurei Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, who lived in the 1850s. The question was in 1850, I think, Tafresh Nun Hey. What year was that? It was about 130 years ago. So would be 1890, sorry. He was asked from Jews in Brazil. They're buying their lulavim from somewhere in Europe. And they wanted to know, should they turn the lulavim upside down, because they're on the other side of the world, and the way the lulav grew, it grew upwards. So maybe they should turn the lulav upside down to be the way it grew. That was the question they asked, and the same question was in Australia. And the answer was that had they been in Australia, how would they have grown? That's how you carry it. So we're doing it the right way. Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned. And this is where we get that we turn the esrog upside down so that we have not fulfilled the mitzvah until after the bracha. Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned.
What is the maskana? You know, we had this discussion before in the Gemara about, you know, if you hold it sideways or if it was in a case or something like that. What was the maskana about when you start doing the mitzvah? I mean, if you when it comes to sideways,
there's a big argument here. There's a big argument in Achronim. When we say Atze Shimtim Eimdi, we want it to be standing up. Is the problem that it shouldn't be upside down, or is it the positive that we want it standing up? If the main focus is it shouldn't be upside down, because that's a bazillion, it's an insult, and sideways, if you hold the lulav sideways, you already did your mitzvah, or the esrog sideways. But if you hold that the main thing here is that Atze Shimtim Eimdim, that it's more covered if it's upright than if you put your hand on the esrog and hold it sideways. You have not done your mitzvah until you physically pick it up. And I guess technically speaking, most of those who, if your custom is to take the esrog, turn it upside down, usually you start if it's lying in the box in a horizontal way. Usually you pick up horizontally and then you turn it upside down. So it looks like the minig is that it's not a problem. It's only if you had it first upright and then you turn it upside down. That's an issue we discussed last week. But if you have it sideways in your hand and then you turn it upside down, according to most of poskim, it's all right. You haven't yet done your mitzvah, because we insist it should be upright.
I presume also if they're in the holders, it's not considered holding.
If you hold in the box, it's not holding at all. No. Remember, Rava said
there was a discussion about whether that was considered holding or not.
Rava said Lakicha Aidei Davar Achar is not a Lakicha. Remember, Rava said that Lakicha Aidei Davar Achar through a box, let's say, or a silver box, is not called taking. Okay. Gemara continues. Time we learned. They have to be standing upright. Davar Achar, another shot. Oimdim means that they're going to last forever. Sorry, before we get to that. Oimdim shema'amidin es tzipuyim. That that you actually took the gold plate and they nailed it on the board. It wasn't that, Rashi says, it wasn't they had a gold sheet and made it very thick so it can stand on its own in front of the board. They actually put it onto the board, so the board was holding up the gold. Or others say they didn't make it very thick and then hollowed it out and slipped the gold over the stick. They nailed it on. Third shot, that what it means is going to last forever. Because we're going to learn in Gemara Saita that the Mishkan was actually buried and hidden somewhere, and which we don't know where it is. So you should know that you would think that wood would rot over time. You should know Oimdin is lasting forever. Because you might say, we lose hope and we lose any anticipation that we'll ever have it again. It lasts forever. Talking about things that Rabbi Yirmiyah said in Ne'em Hashem Yechai, we'll mention a couple others. If I want, I can make the entire world exempt and will never get punished from Hashem. From the day that I was born, at until today. If my son Eliezer was with me, together our chus will be compounded from the day of Abelazar. For the day the world was created until today. And there's a king called Yosem ben Ozio, and he was phenomenal. According to Rashi, Rashi says he was an unbelievable tzaddik, and others have a gift to take the word tzaddik out. But basically, his father had leprosy, and his father Uzziah was a king, had leprosy, so he had to be isolated for years. And he took over Yosef, but he never declared himself king, even though he ran the country king. And every edict he gave, everything he said, he did whatever it was, he always said it in his father's name. It was unbelievable kibbutz. And so therefore that humility, that he was the leader, yet he gave all the credit to his father. So that humility, if all three combine, then we can forgive the Eden until the end. So the obvious question is, so why didn't he do that? So why didn't he then stand and advocate on behalf of all of us? So what does it actually mean? I once heard a beautiful pshat on what Shimon was doing, and based on that pshat, I can tell you why it never happened. We're going to learn the Gemara in Sanhedrin of Tzadik Beis. The Gemara says over there that when it comes to punish, the whole story there with a goy asked Rebbe, how can you punish anybody? And the Gemara gives how can you punish? And the Neshama will claim that the goof is responsible. What do you want from me? I'm spiritual. I'm good. It's the goof who did all the averis. Why are you punishing? And the goof will say, I'm dead. I'm a corpse. It's the Neshama who vivified me and gave me life. So the Neshama should be punished. So what does Hashem do? He puts the Neshama in the goof and he punishes them both. The story with the blind person and the one who was limping, one could hardly walk. And then the story that the king put one top of the other, he punished them both for stealing from his orchard. So in the Gemara Shabbos, that Tzadik Gimel on base, we had an argument in the Mishnah. If two people do a malacha together, what happens? So Rabbi Yehuda says, the three opinions of Shimon Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Zeh yochel v'zeh yochel. If you could have done it on your own and you do it together with somebody else, shnayim shasu p'turim. But if Zeh einu yochel v'zeh einu yochel, you couldn't have done it on your own, and the other person could not have done it on their own, let's say it's a heavy package, then shnayim shasu is chayiv, because that's the normal way of doing it. Rab Shimon says, even if Zeh einu yochel v'zeh einu yochel, you couldn't do it on your own, but if two people do it together, you are potter, because it says ba'asayisa, and now many mefarshim, the Chavas Yer and others hold it's not a din only in Shabbos, it's a din in Kol HaTorah. So Shimon Yochai said, I can exempt all the people from ever doing a sin, because I'll be the advocate, and I will say, okay, you have a neshama and a guf. Each one could not have done that there on its own. Ze einu yochel v'ze einu yochel. But I hold that ze einu yochel and yochel, you're potter. Shnayim shasu p'turin. So therefore, you should be exempt from Gehenna. However, because the halach is not like Rab Shimon, the halach is like Rab Yehuda. If you cannot do it on your own, you have to do it jointly, then you're both liable. That's why it didn't help his advocacy. Anyway, let's continue. Another thing that he said in Shimon I saw that these upright people, these very righteous people, they more to the very few. Im Elefein, there are 1,000. Ani ubni mehen. I and my son are from them. We can learn about his son in the 7th parak B'Metzia that the Rabbanan did not like his son at all. In fact, they sort of treat him like a pariah, as we'll see. Im meya haim, if there's 100, ani ubni mehen. I and my son are from them. And im shnayim haim, if there are 2, ani ubni haim. It's me and my son. Says the Gemara, Mizutu Kol Hai, was only 2 great tzaddikim. Rava said, Tam Misrei Alpha Dorave. There were 18,000 rows of tzaddikim sitting before Hashem. The Kamek Kuchabrich for Hashem. Shnemer. It says in the pasuk, Saviv Shmoin Nasser Olav, surrounding him, there were 18,000. Says the Gemara, you're right. There were many righteous people over the years, but like kosher. Hodem Estakle Bas Vaklaya Mida, It depends. Some of them were able to see Hashem through this, something we call a magnifying glass. There was a glass there. Some glasses are magnifying glasses, and some glasses are dim. They're opaque and they cover over. And so those who can see with a magnifying glass or a very clear glass were very few. And those who saw through, a dark glass, there were many more. So he was alone. Says the Gemara, Rabbeinu Chananel asked a very interesting question here. Beautiful, this Rabbeinu Chananel goes to town on this whole Gemara. He loves it. So he asks, you're asking a question of Shimon Yochai from Rav and Abaye. And what does that even mean? How can you ask a question from Amoira on a Tana? How can you ask a question from something Rabbi said 300 years later to Shimon? I mean, what kind of question is that? So Rabbeinu Chananel, I'm paraphrasing him, says, the Gemara is trying to tell you that whatever Rav and Abaye said, they didn't make it up. Whatever they said came from their teachers who came from their teachers. So obviously it came from generations back, and therefore whatever they said is 100% true, and therefore just like this is 100% true, and we need to explain that Shimon Yochai, everything Rav and Abaye said was 100% true. Others said they had Ruach HaKodesh, so therefore everything they said has to be dealt with. Says the Gemara, Mizutra Kolahai. Okay, those who saw through a clear glass, there are so few, only two people. There's a minimum number of tzaddikim are 36. The mekable apashchil that interact with Hashem every single day. Praiseworthy are those who wait for Him, and the word loy is 36. In Gemara Chulin we learned there were 45. A certain amount of Chutz La'aretz and a certain amount of Eretz Yisrael. But Abaye says with 36, like Kasha, Hada Aili Bebar, Hada Aili Beloiba. Those who can come in with permission, they need to intercede. You get the Malachim to intercede on behalf. There were 36. But those who can come without permission, only two. Rav Shimon Yochai and his son. Rabbeinu Chananel says a beautiful pshat. He said that's not what it means at all. That's Rashi. He says Bar means a son. How many tzaddikim he says that not only were their tzaddik, but their son was of equal caliber? Very few. Look at Moshe Rabbeinu. Very few that their sons were in the same caliber. We'll have more in the Dorim where it says the other way around. That why is it that Talmidei Chacham children not Talmidei Chacham? And that's what he says there. Those great tzaddikim that their children were on the same level as they are, very, very few. Many tzaddikim, but the children were not like them. There are many. That's shot here. Anyway, let's continue the Gemara. V'shas pitirasan mahin oimri. When they would finish the exercise with our rabbis, what would they say? We said that they would say lekah l'mizbech. How in the world can you join praising Hashem together with a creation of His mizbech? But Tanya didn't we learn anybody who joins Hashem's name with something else should be uprooted from this world. It says there's nothing besides Hashem. So you must say you're right. Let's translate what he actually means. Let's interpret what he means. This is what we're saying. Hashem, we are not saying thank you, but we are acknowledging. But to the Mizbeach, we are praising. They're praising the Mizbeach, but Hashem accepts you as our intercessor. We're praising the Mizbeach. So to Hashem, Moedim him, he acknowledges, and to the Mizbeach, we are thanking. Then we say, why did we say there was that we didn't use a Haishaina, we used rather a lulav? See, it says kapais, shnayim, achas a lulav. It says it's written in plural, kapais, two, one to the lulav was there. Just like Abba Shol said, arvei nochal, which means there's two mitzvahs, a mitzvah aravas by the lulav and aravas by the mizbech. I dash in kapais. Arvei nochal I'll use for another drasha to tell you it doesn't have to grow by the water, but I'll use the word kapais in plural to tell you two. That one is the lulav and one's mizbech. According to this, charayis means actually the lulav. They will place the lulav around the mizbech. And this is, if you learn this way, the Tesa says, and definitely there was no aravas whatsoever. Rabbanan say, nah, kapas ksi. We look at the way it's written, it's kapas. Rab Levi Amar Kitama. Rab Levi says there's only a logic here. You know where Rabbi Yehuda is coming from? Purely logic. That just like a palm, mad tama, just like a date. This date palm. Ein loy ela leiv echad. Rashi says it has sap running different than all other fruits. There's sap running through the branches. Well, here the sap is only in the trunk itself of the tree, but there's no sap in the branches. So just like the sap has only one internal, one heart. We only have one heart dedicated to Hashem. Other Rishonim say that everything else has like a peel around it, a bark or a peel around it. Here by a lulav, there's no peel or anything else. It's all the same. They use expression toichai kibarai, that what you see on the outside is what you have in the inside, and that's what we are. We're not two-faced. That externally we behave one way and internally another way. We are on the surface just like we are internally. According to this says, if it's only a logical thing, then for sure, Rabbi Yochanan also had aravas. But he's saying, in addition to the aravas, they also would put lulavim or these branches by the mizbech. Not everyone agrees it's a lulav. Others say it wasn't a lulav; it was just the branches from a lulav tree. But after it became really solid, inflexible. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, lulav, an interesting argument. If you name Shmuel, lulav is shiva. I say Shmuel says lulav every day you make a new bracha, because every day is a separate mitzvah. But Sukkah, you only make a bracha the first day of Sukkot, and it continues throughout the entire Sukkot. It's the same mitzvah. So you make a bracha in the beginning, and that's sufficient. My timer, and the Gemara explains, lulav, the lulav, every day is a new mitzvah, because at night you cannot bench lulav. Every day is a separate mitzvah, so every day you make a separate bracha. But Sukkah, Sukkah is one long mitzvah, it never stops, day, night, day. We treat Sukkah like one long mitzvah. That's the view of Shmuel.
What's the bracha on Sukkah? You say Leishiv every day.
No, not according to him. As you're going to see in the Gemara today and mainly tomorrow, that not at all. So Shmuel says that you only make a bracha at the beginning of Sukkot once, and that covers you the entire time. The Rabbi Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the other way around. Rabbi Chana said the name of Rabbi Yochanan exactly the opposite of Shmuel. Sukkah Shiva. Every day you go in the Sukkah, you make a bracha. When exactly do you make a bracha when you go in the Sukkah? A big argument Rishonim. Tosfos here says right here on the page that every time you go to do any activity, whether you're going to eat, whether you're going to drink, whether you're going to sleep, you have to make a bracha. The Ritva brings from some Rishonim that even if you're sitting in the sukkah, but if you're changing your activity, for example, you had a meal and now you're taking out a Gemara to learn, you have to make a new bracha for the Gemara. If you're going to sleep, even though you haven't left the sukkah, it's a new mitzvah, a new activity in the sukkah, you have to make another bracha. Others say that if you're in the middle of a meal and you walk out, every time you walk out, doesn't matter why you walked out, to bring in food, you got to make a new bracha. Others say if you're walking out, the Meiri says if you're walking out to bring in food for the sukkah, you don't have to make a new bracha. But if you're walking out to say hello to a friend or to the bathroom, if you're doing anything which doesn't support what you're doing in the sukkah, then you have to make a new bracha. And others say, but we don't hold like any of these. We hold like Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says that we decided that the bracha should be on the main activity, which is eating. And all other activities of the sukkah are secondary to eating. And therefore, when you make a bracha on the meal, it covers all your other activities the rest of the day. So that's why we don't make a bracha on sleeping or anything else. The bracha is on eating.
What about going into the sukkah? Isn't that
no, you have to do something there.
To build the sukkah?
You have to do something there. We'll see in a minute. I'll talk to you in a minute. So
if you just walk into the sukkah, you don't make a bracha. If you sit down and
saying I don't understand. All I'm saying is I don't know why you don't make it.
You have to do something. You have to live there.
It's a question of making the sukkah.
It's living. You have to live it. Living is doing something, activity. But you're right. The Rambam says, we'll come in a second. The Rabbeinu Haigoin says that, and it makes sense according to Rabbeinu Tam, and this was the Shulchan Aruch Rab, the Alter Rebbe Paskin's clear in Shulchan Aruch. In your own sukkah, you only make a bracha when you eat a proper meal, and all kinds of laws. You have to wash, or what a meal is. But if you go to someone else's sukkah, if as soon as you walk to the sukkah, just sit down for 5 minutes to fabring or to schmooze or to have a drink of Coke or something, you have to make a leisha sukkah. Because Rabbeinu Tam's reason for not making a bracha is because you're having a meal in your sukkah, and that covers everything else. When you go into a friend's sukkah, if you're not having a meal, and then what's your exemption? Why aren't you making a bracha? As you said, every time you sit down in the sukkah, you have to make a bracha. So the Rabbi Haigoin Paskin, so Paskin Shulchan Aruch Rab, if you go to anybody's sukkah, to have a drink of Coke, you have to make a bracha. Leisha b'sukkah. Says, yeah, Lamaisa. Yeah, 100%.
What does the Shulchan Aruch, the Yosef Karo say?
He doesn't talk about it, but if you have time, there's a long Magen Avram and a very long Taz that discusses this whole issue.
What's the conclusion?
I just told you. Depends who you. This is the conclusion that I follow. Others don't. Others say Rabbi Goyen is arguing with Rabbeinu Tam that when he says when you go to someone else's sukkah you have to make a bracha, he was arguing with Rabbeinu Tam, but they don't really explain how the bracha that you make in your own sukkah covers what you do in another sukkah. There's a Taisus and brachas that Fir Aleph and Beis that talks about why you don't make a bracha on sleeping and comes up with a whole different reason. He says you're going to make a bracha leisha b'sukkah when you're going to go to sleep. What happens if you don't fall asleep? It's a bracha v'atola. So therefore you don't make a bracha. Let's continue. Okay.
Three main meals if you had 3 main meals in a sukkah a day, would you make 3 brachas?
If you walked out. Sukkah? Only if you walked out. Except the Taz disagrees. The Taz holds every time you start a new meal in the sukkah, even if you didn't walk out, you got to make another bracha. But we hold like the Magen Avram there, and that says that if you didn't walk out of the sukkah, you don't make another bracha.
You don't eat bread?
Sorry?
If I go for dinner in my sukkah and I don't eat any bread for dinner, I still make a bracha?
Well, there are laws. Remember, we learned it depends what you're eating. If you ate mazainis, you have to be kaveh suda. If you only ate shahakal and hadama, you don't make a leisha b'sukkah. You don't. And that's why you should eat a piece of mazainis at least, so you can have the mitzvah of saying leisha b'sukkah. You're there already.
You say leisha b'sukkah whenever you're chayav to eat that food in the sukkah.
Yeah, that's right. And
that's what? No, I just understood this now.
Yeah. So if you go to sukkah to have a fruit, let's say, it's very nice, you should try to eat everything in the sukkah, but you don't make a bracha leisha b'sukkah. Only when you wash or you have mazainis.
So when you have a bit of fruit, you don't have to make leisha.
No.
Chayav to eat fruit in the sukkah.
I didn't know that.
Better to eat. So we had a Mishnah in Daf Chav Beis where they said even water, anything, if you're near a sukkah, bring it in the sukkah and eat it in the sukkah. Remember Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, they said everything bring into the sukkah if you can.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is if you have a piece of meat or fish or something like that, you're not really chayav to eat that in the sukkah. So therefore, if you're just eating that, you don't make a leisha b'sukkah in it.
Exactly. That's why. But still, it's better to eat in the sukkah and better to take a cracker or something, make a mazayna so you can make a leisha b'sukkah.
But in someone else's sukkah, you would make the bracha.
That's right. So according to Rabbi Goy and according to Shulchan Aruch, if he goes on a sukkah and eat just meat, you would make a leisha b'sukkah because someone else's sukkah. Okay, let's continue. Rabbi Bachana is a third view, and there's a second view. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Bachana says Rabbi Yochanan. Sorry. So this is the Rabbi Bachana says the Rabbi Yochanan. He completely argues the Shmuel the other way around. Sukkah shiva v'lulav yamechad. He says sukkah you got to make a bracha every day, but lulav only once. What's the logic in that? My timer. What's the logic? Sukkah, which is mahatayda shiva, every day you make brachas. But lulav is only the rabbanon. Sagilu b'chad yoma. You only make it the first day, which is mahatayda. In other words, as you'll see in tomorrow's Gemara, they hold that any mitzvah the rabbanon you do not make a bracha on. Comes along opinion number 3, which is the halacha today. Ki also Ravin Ravin came and said Rabbi Yochanan, echad zeh, the echad zeh shiva. He said Rabbi Yochanan, it's sukkah you make 7 days because it's a mitzvah in the Torah, and lulav you make 7 days because every day is a mitzvah. And I hold on a mitzvah the rabbanon you also make a bracha. Rabbi Yochanan says, Nikait de Rabba bar Bachana b'yadach. You should follow what Rabba Bachana says. The kulu amaroi kaima kavase b'sukkah. When it comes to sukkah, the 2 views of Rabbi Yochanan is that you make a bracha 7 days. The question is by lulav. Everyone agrees. Rabbi Yochanan said by sukkah you make every single day. So by sukkah every day we make brachas, and like those gave you all the different opinions. And when it comes to lulav, because Shmuel says you make it every day, we're going to follow that you make it every single day. Now, in the Gemara tomorrow, I'll just tell you a quick thing there. The Brisa uses the expression nichnis leisha ba. If you walk into the sukkah to sit down. So the Rambam holds that you're supposed to make the bracha leisha ba sukkah before you sit down while you're still standing. because it says nichnis leisheba. When you go in order to sit, the bracha is leisheba sukkah, to sit down, and you always have to make a bracha before you sit down. The Rosh and most Rishonim say, according to the Rambam, then you should make a bracha before you walk into the sukkah, because even if you're standing in the sukkah, well, you don't make a bracha leisheba sukkah, you have to physically sit. And therefore, according to the Rambam, if you want to make the bracha before, you should make it outside the sukkah. So the Rosh says leisha means to spend time in the sukkah. And therefore, you should first sit down. And then, usually the minhag today is you make hamaitzi first, and then you make the leisha b'sukkah. Or you make whatever it is that you're going to eat, sit down, and you make the bracha afterwards. Some say you should make the leisha b'sukkah before, but we make it afterwards, because we translate leisha, it doesn't mean literally sit, it means to spend time. Okay, everyone have a Shavua Tov.